The story of Jesus' baptism. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Judean wilderness, painting the rugged landscape in shades of amber and gold. The air held the crisp freshness of early day, carrying with it the faint scent of wild herbs and sun-warmed earth. Along the winding path that led down to the Jordan River, a solitary figure walked with purposeful steps. Jesus, now a man of 30 years, moved with the quiet grace of one who knew exactly where he needed to be. The years in Nazareth had flowed by like a gentle stream, each one adding layers of wisdom to his understanding. His hands bore the marks of honest work, shaped by the carpenter's trade learned from Joseph. His eyes held depths of compassion and knowledge that drew people to him. Though he had lived a simple life in their small town, word had spread throughout the region of a powerful voice crying out in the wilderness. John, known as the Baptist, had drawn crowds to the Jordan's banks with his passionate calls for repentance and renewal. People spoke of his unusual appearance, his diet of locusts and wild honey, but most of all, they spoke of the fire in his words and the authority in his baptism. As Jesus approached the river, he could hear the murmur of the gathered crowd. The Jordan flowed steadily, its waters green and cool against the desert landscape. People from all walks of life stood along its banks or sat in small groups, their faces reflecting both uncertainty and hope. Some were being baptized, emerging from the water with expressions of profound relief and joy. John stood waist deep in the river, his weathered face intense with purpose as he called out to the crowd. His voice carried across the water like thunder, yet held notes of deep compassion. His rough garment of camel's hair marked him as different from the religious leaders of the day, a prophet whose authority came not from temples or schools, but from wilderness wisdom and divine calling. As Jesus moved closer to the water's edge, a subtle change seemed to ripple through the air. The constant breeze that stirred the river reeds grew still, as if nature itself held its breath. John, who had been speaking words of fierce truth to the crowd, suddenly fell silent. His eyes, accustomed to seeing through pretense and pride, met those of Jesus with instant recognition. The cousins had not met since childhood, yet something deeper than family ties passed between them in that moment. John, who had baptized countless others, felt his own unworthiness rise up like a wave. His voice, so strong moments before, grew soft with humility. "I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" Jesus stepped into the river, the cool waters swirling around his feet. His response carried both gentleness and certainty. "Let it be so now, for it is proper for us to fulfill all righteousness." The words settled on the water like morning mist, carrying meanings that would echo through centuries to come. The Jordan flowed around them both now, its ancient waters witness to countless moments of divine history. This same river had parted for Joshua, carried Elijah's mantle, and healed Naaman's leprosy. Now it waited to participate in another sacred moment, its gentle current touching the feet of one greater than all who had come before. John's strong hands, weathered by sun and wilderness living, trembled slightly as he lowered Jesus beneath the surface. The water embraced him like a garment, cool and clean against his skin. For a breath, the river cradled the one through whom all waters had been created, while above, the gathered crowd watched in reverent silence. As Jesus rose from the waters, sunlight catching the droplets falling from his upturned face, something extraordinary began to unfold. The very air seemed to shimmer with divine presence. The sky, which had been a clear desert blue, opened like a flower of light above them. Those watching would later struggle to find words to describe what they witnessed. The heavens themselves appeared to part, not with thunder or darkness, but with gentle radiance that surpassed the brightness of the desert sun. From this opening descended a dove, moving with such grace and purpose that all who saw knew this was no ordinary bird. Its wings caught the light like living flame as it descended toward Jesus, yet brought with it a peace that settled over the entire gathering. The dove came to rest upon Jesus, its presence both physical and spiritual, a visible manifestation of invisible reality. In that moment, the boundary between heaven and earth seemed to dissolve. The air itself vibrated with holy energy, yet remained as gentle as a mother's touch. Those standing closest would later speak of a perfume unlike any earthly fragrance, as if heaven's gardens had released their sweetness into the desert air. Then came the voice, filling the space above the river, yet intimate as a whisper in each listener's heart. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. The words rolled across the water like gentle thunder, clear as morning light, yet soft as falling dew. They carried authority that made the very stones seem to listen, yet brought comfort like a familiar embrace. Jesus stood in the flowing water, accepting this divine affirmation with humble grace. Water droplets gleamed like jewels in his dark hair, catching the extraordinary light that still emanated from above. His face reflected a peace and joy that touched everyone who witnessed it, though none could fully grasp the magnitude of what they were seeing. John stood motionless, his own baptismal ministry now transformed by this sacred moment. The man who had fearlessly confronted kings and religious leaders found himself overcome with holy awe. The cousin he had known from childhood stood before him, revealed as something far more, yet remained as approachable as ever. The paradox settled into his heart like a precious stone, to be treasured and pondered in the days ahead. The gathered crowd remained unusually still, as if moving might break the spell of holiness that had settled over the scene. The regular sounds of the wilderness, the call of birds, and rustle of wind through reeds gradually returned. Yet everything seemed somehow different, touched by the echo of heaven's voice and the lingering presence of divine light. As Jesus walked up from the water, his feet leaving gentle impressions in the riverside sand, the dove ascended back into the heavens. Its departure was as grace-filled as its arrival, leaving behind a sense of blessing that seemed to cling to the very air. The opening in the sky slowly closed, like a curtain drawn over a glimpse of paradise. Yet the light that had touched Jesus remained visible in his face and bearing. The people who had come seeking John's baptism of repentance found themselves witnesses to something far greater. Many would carry this memory with them for the rest of their lives, telling their children and grandchildren of the day heaven opened above the Jordan. They had come looking for cleansing and found themselves present at the beginning of a new chapter in God's story. Those closest to Jesus noticed a subtle change in his demeanor, as if the public acknowledgement of his identity had strengthened him for what lay ahead. There was a new purpose in his step as he prepared to leave the river valley, though his gentle manner remained unchanged. The time of quiet preparation in Nazareth was ending, the season of public ministry about to begin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Jordan Valley as Jesus took his leave of John and the gathered crowd. His path led into the wilderness, where he would spend time in solitude before beginning his public ministry. The Spirit that had descended like a dove now guided him forward, each step carrying him toward his divine purpose. John watched his cousin's departing figure with mixed emotions. Joy at having witnessed heaven's confirmation, mingled with a deep understanding that things would never be quite the same. He would continue his ministry of baptism and preparation, but now with the certainty that the one he had proclaimed was truly here. His voice carried a new note of fulfillment as he returned to his calling. The people who had witnessed this extraordinary event gradually dispersed, carrying with them more than they yet understood. Some would later become followers of Jesus, recognizing in his teaching the same authority they had sensed at his baptism. Others would share the story as a testimony to God's continuing work among his people. All had been touched by the presence of divine love made visible. The baptism of Jesus reminds us that even the Son of God chose to identify with humanity's need for cleansing and renewal. In his humble submission to baptism, we see divine love stooping to embrace human tradition and transform it into something more. The heavens still open for those who seek with sincere hearts, though perhaps in quieter ways.